I'm really glad you're here. Whatever kind of day you've had, I hope the next little while feels calmer, better, and a bit more meaningful with a good story to listen to. If you enjoy these stories, please subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, and share it with someone who might enjoy it too. Now, get comfortable, and let's start the story. On the 12th day of the blockade, Iris Halden stood in a cargo bay that smelled of coolant, dry grain, and sterile fabric when a dockhand told her the last pallet of airway filters had been secured for descent. She looked up from the manifest. How long if the hospitals below lose backup flow? The dockhand did not soften the answer. Best case, 2 days for the smaller wards. Less for the respiratory units. Iris nodded once. She was the senior civilian logistics commander for the Earth Relief Corridor Authority, and she had spent enough years moving medicine through broken borders to know when numbers had already become bodies. Halcyon Reach was not being called a battlefield anymore. In the language of public briefings, it was a transition zone under temporary protection. The truth on the ground was simpler. Water pumps were failing, 3 civil grids had gone dark, and old hospitals were running on patchwork reserves. Millions of human residents were surviving hour by hour. Astor Gate filled the forward view as Nightingale convoy approached the main orbital station. Iris saw the first warning before control cleared them in a holding pattern. The flags were gone. The civilian berths that had once flown Earth blue now carried the pale seal of the Regional Stabilization Authority. The customs rings had been repainted in emergency neutral bands, and even the rescue beacons had been scrubbed of district marks once tied to the local Human Council. That was not battlefield damage. That was paperwork painted into space. Iris stood beside Captain Narapel on the bridge as the convoy drifted into position. Nara studied the feed. Astor Gate Control confirms cargo inspection only, she said. They deny direct distribution authority. Of course they do, Iris said. Her voice stayed calm. It always did at first. People who did not know her often mistook that calm for softness, but the ones who had worked with her in the Kuros evacuations and the Helion Strait cholera run knew better. Astor Gate granted them a sealed corridor and a formal reception designed to feel polite and final at the same time. Administrator Weiler's son met Iris in the civic intake hall with 2 legal officers, 3 silent security escorts, and the expression of a man who preferred outcomes already arranged. Commander Halden, he said, on behalf of the Regional Stabilization Authority, welcome to Astor Gate. We appreciate Earth's willingness to contribute humanitarian support to the residents of Halcyon Reach. Iris noticed the legal console waiting on the table before she sat. You are controlling all civilian berths. You have restricted local registry traffic and reassigned district identification. Under what temporary authority did you remove Earth insignia from civil infrastructure? Weiler folded his hands. Halcyon Reach is currently classified as an externally stabilized population zone following a verified lapse in continuous civilian governance. Under Galactic Council Emergency Administration guidelines, active sovereign symbols may be suspended where their continued use would cause confusion about chain of control. Confusion for whom? Iris asked. For civilians who require aid delivery without interference from jurisdictional disputes. He slid the protocol across the table. It was long, dense, and polished enough to look reasonable. Iris read fast. If Earth signed, Nightingale cargo would be unloaded, processed through regional stabilization channels, and distributed under neutral stabilization codes. All recipients would be registered under temporary population designators until the zone's governance status was reviewed. Any local Earth administration records would remain suspended pending legal consolidation. It was a brilliant trap because it offered exactly what human pain demanded right now. Food, air filters, antibiotics, and power cells. In return, it asked Earth to agree that Halcyon Reach was no longer a community under human civilian authority. It would become only a distressed mass. Under outside care. If I sign this, Iris said, you get to say Earth has acknowledged that Halcyon Reach no longer governs itself. Weiler did not smile. If you sign, Commander, the people below receive immediate relief without further delay. And if I do not sign, he turned one hand slightly. as though the answer were a law of weather. Then inspection will continue. Cargo cannot be released into a legally unstable environment until distribution accountability is secured. Iris understood perfectly. He was using the sick as leverage and wrapping it in procedure. Captain Nara shifted beside her, wanting to argue. Iris gave the smallest motion with 2 fingers and Nara went still again. What is your current estimate on systemic medical degradation in Port Helion? Iris asked. Vaylor's aide answered from a pad. 3 major facilities operating below preferred reserve threshold. 8 neighborhood units downgraded. Water sterilization strain in 4 districts. Elevated respiratory mortality risk if filtration shortages continue. How long? Iris asked. Material decline likely within 48 standard hours. Iris closed the protocol. I want an on-site verification pass. Vaylor's eyes narrowed by a fraction. Verification has already been performed. By your authority, Iris said. I'm asking for Earth observation on the ground. My cargo decisions depend on actual conditions, not summary language. Your cargo decisions depend on legal compliance. No, Iris said. My cargo decisions depend on whether your legal compliance is being used to bury a living colony. The room tightened. One of the escorts shifted its stance. Vaylor stayed controlled, which made him more dangerous. Commander Halden, Halcyon Reach suffered a breakdown of administrative continuity. Earth's governance failed to maintain stable civil operations. Our intervention prevented wider collapse. He leaned the protocol forward by 1 inch. Do not make this harder for the people below. There was again the oldest coercion in disaster politics. If you resist the document, you're hurting the hungry. Iris kept her face unreadable, but a different map had already begun to form in her mind. This was no longer only about whether aid moved. It was about whether Halcyon Reach would still exist as a human civic fact by the time relief arrived. She pushed the protocol back. I am requesting descent clearance to Port Helion with a technical assessment team, medical review team, and civil registry observer. Denied. 1 legal officer said at once. On what grounds? Pending stabilization integrity review. Your integrity, Iris said softly, or the colonies? Vaylor finally allowed himself a trace of impatience. You are not here to conduct sovereignty theater. You are here to support population survival. I am here, Iris said, to prevent population survival from being used as the instrument of civilian erasure. He studied her for a long moment. Men like him always believed there would come a point when a practical woman would accept reality, sign the compromise, and call it mercy. At last he said, a limited observational descent may be granted under escort. No cargo release. No independent registry activation. No civil facility reactivation. The assessment is advisory only. Iris stood, granted in writing. As they left the intake hall, Nara said under her breath, you just bought us a walk through a cage. Iris kept moving. Then we learn how the cage is locked. Back aboard Nightingale, she opened a secure channel to Earth Command. Her superiors expected a tactical summary, but she gave them 1 sentence first. This is not a relief dispute, she said. This is a civilian erasure. The line went quiet for half a breath. Then Deputy Director Solwyn asked, how bad? Worse than the briefings. They are rewriting legal identity through distribution control. If we sign the current protocol, we save lives now and concede that Halcyon Reach is no longer an Earth-administered human colony. You have proof. Not yet. I will. You are authorized for observation only. I heard the part where we are supposed to watch our own people become a managed population. Careful, Iris. I'm being careful, she said. That is why I'm going down. She ended the call before the argument could settle into a command. 2 hours later, the descent. Shuttle cut through the dust-streaked upper atmosphere above Halcyon Reach. Port Helion spread beneath them in long bands of habitation, transit rails, refinery towers, and civic domes stitched around the mining spine of the belt. Iris had seen the colony years earlier, when St. Aurora's Civil Hospital ran at full capacity and district schools flew both local council banners and Earth Blue on public days. Back then, Halcyon Reach had looked like what it was, a rough, overworked, stubborn human place. Now several domes sat dim. One transport ring showed black scoring from recent conflict. 3 whole neighborhoods were on emergency low light, and pale emblems of the Stabilization Authority had been stamped over customs plazas and utility depots. The shuttle landed an intake pad outside Port Helion Central. Stabilization officers waited with tablets and clipped instructions, and a woman in gray maintenance coveralls coughed in her sleeve while holding a ration tag between 2 fingers as if it burned. Iris looked at the scanner line. Why are recipients being classified by temporary population code instead of colony registry? She asked the escort beside her. Efficiency during transition, the escort said. Transition to what? Iris wanted to ask. But she was already learning that the real answers here lived one layer below the official ones. Port Helion smelled of hot metal, dust, machine water, and too many people living under partial power. Iris walked through a city being kept alive just enough to remain usable. That was the detail that settled hardest in her chest. If a place was truly abandoned, the lines were clearer. Here, the system was saving bodies while stripping away the structure that made those bodies a community. The escort took her first to a neighborhood triage hall operating under authority management. Beds were lined in ordered rows, emergency inhalers were stacked in locked cabinets, and water packs were rationed by code. It all looked efficient until Iris asked where records were stored. In the Integrated Stabilization Database, the hall supervisor said, "And prior residency? Suspended pending civic review. Suspended from access, or suspended from existence." The supervisor looked away. By the time Iris stepped back into the outer corridor, she had stopped thinking of the protocol as a bad compromise. It was a knife with a clean handle. She turned to her team. "We go to St. Aurora next." The escort said, "That facility is sealed." "Then I want to see the seal," Iris said. St. Aurora Civil Hospital sat in the East Medical Quarter behind a line of dark service towers and a transport lane that had not seen regular public traffic in days. The building still stood, broad and white beneath a layer of ash-colored dust, with upper windows reflecting weak afternoon light through the haze. But the plaza was empty. No ambulances, no district workers, no families outside the entrances. There were only legal strips over the doors, authority markers on the outer wall, and the dead quiet of a place removed from civic life without anyone daring to blow it apart. Dr. Lisa Morrow was waiting for them in a temporary treatment annex 3 blocks away. She was tall, older than Iris by perhaps 10 years, and worn thin by exhaustion that no sleep could fix. "You took too long," she said. Iris accepted the anger. "We were held at Astor Gate." "Of course you were." Lisa led them past curtained beds where respiratory patients lay under portable assistance rigs. Volunteers moved in practiced silence through a hall that had once been used for public health outreach and now held supply racks against every wall. "I was acting director at St. Aurora when the Stabilization Authority arrived," Lisa said. "At first they asked for temporary integration. Then they said local power instability made centralized triage more efficient. Then they moved our medicine stores into controlled dispersal hubs. Then they froze our patient access system until legal review." "What happened to your registry links?" Iris asked. "Cut from the Earth CivicNet. They said continuity could be restored later." "And later never came." "No. What came was the phrase population continuity management." She stopped beside a portable air scrubber and looked straight at Iris. "They're trying to save bodies while killing the institution. Once St. Aurora is no longer a functioning Earth civilian hospital, they can say the colony lost organized civil capacity on its own." At Orbit, Iris had suspected as much. Hearing it from Lisa made it heavier. "Can St. Aurora be restarted?" Iris asked. "Not as a shell. As a real hospital. Maybe we would need power, med storage, data recovery, a nursing corps, and legal standing that the authority will not grant. Which of those is hardest?" "Records," Lisa said at once. "Without registry continuity, we can treat people, but they will say we are only operating a field shelter inside a sealed facility. That will not restore Earth civilian status." There it was. Power, medicine, staff, and records. Iris asked to see the old hospital from the outside. On the walk there, she saw more of the quarter than the authority wanted her to see. Water lines at district taps, workers wearing temporary tags instead of municipal credentials, delivery carts rerouted through stabilization depots, and a notice board offering priority fuel cells only to residents who completed updated civic classification. At the east service fence of St. Aurora, they found Jonas Vale waiting with a maintenance case in one hand and a bad mood written across his face. He had been the senior grid engineer for 3 linked neighborhoods before the authority froze district control. If they tell you the building is dead, they're lying in a legally useful way, he said. He crouched by an access panel on the outer wall and pulled up a cracked schematic. Primary feed is cut publicly, but the tertiary health line under the East Service Trench still carries intermittent charge from the old district reserve. It is weak and unstable, but it exists. Enough to prove the hospital can be recovered if someone stops pretending it cannot. Can you make a hole? Iris asked. With parts and time. How much of each? Jonas looked at the sealed doors. More than they want us to have. Less than they think. Later that evening, they met Merrick Tane in a freight canteen that had become half union office and half ration hall. Merrick was broad-shouldered, blunt, and visibly furious. They're starving us politely, he told. Iris, every crate passes through their chain. Every worker has to scan under a temporary code. If you want water allotment for your block, you sign. If you want your cousin moved up the inhaler list, you sign. Every signature says you are part of a managed population, not a local citizen body. Are people resisting? Iris asked. Some. Most people are tired and scared and trying to keep family alive until morning. He leaned closer. You know what the worst part is? It works. Not because anyone believes them. Because once enough days pass, the paperwork starts to look older than the truth. Back in a borrowed operations room above the canteen, Iris laid everything out on a wall screen. Valer's protocol is the visible part, she said. The deeper play is classification. If Halcyon Reach can be shown to have lost continuous civilian governance, emergency administration becomes the new baseline reality. Nara had come down from orbit as soon as Iris secured ground authorization. She folded her arms and watched the display. So we prove the governance still exists, Nara said. No, Iris replied. We prove the capacity still exists. That is enough to break the claim that the colony became naturally ungovernable. Lisa stepped closer to the screen. What counts? Iris highlighted 4 categories. 1 functioning civil institution that is clearly non-military. 1 independent supply line not processed through stabilization distribution. 1 living chain of resident records. 1 public symbol of Earth civilian authority in active use. That is why they killed St. Aurora, Jonas said. Not physically, Iris replied. Legally. Merrick tapped the table. You could restart a district kitchen. It would help people, Iris said. It would not carry the same weight. Kitchens do not anchor registry continuity. Hospitals do. Lisa asked the question none of them wanted to answer. What if we cannot get it all back in time? Iris looked at the feed clock in the corner. 43 hours, maybe less, before medical deterioration turned from warning into cascade. Then they say the colony failed to maintain civil structure, she said. And once that language is fixed in council briefs, Halcyon Reach becomes the model for every human settlement they want to downgrade later. Silence spread across the room because everyone heard the scale at once. This was not only about one hospital, it was about precedent. Nara broke it first. So this is the hill. Yes, Iris said. This is the hill. The next morning, Iris walked St. Aurora's perimeter under escort, while Jonas pointed out weak points in the seal, and Lisa listed the minimum clinical sections needed for real operation. Intake, respiratory stabilization, pharmacy lock, clean water flow, and basic records. When they reached the old admissions facade, Iris saw the faint shadow on the wall where earth blue had once hung over the entrance. The hooks were still there. Lisa noticed where she was looking. They pulled it down the first morning, before they moved the medicine. Who? The authority officers said visible sovereignty markers were suspended until civic review. One of the local administrators objected. He was removed by noon. Name? Renan Holt. Alive. As far as I know. By mid-cycle, Iris had enough ground truth to send a second report to Earth. It included forced reclassification through aid channels, suspended resident records, hospital neutralization, labor coercion through ration access, and evidence that stabilization was being used to break civic continuity while preserving enough human life to keep outside oversight comfortable. Solon called back instead of replying by memo. You are requesting operational latitude to re-establish an Earth civilian facility inside an externally stabilized zone. I'm requesting the latitude to stop that phrase from becoming permanent reality. Your authority does not include unilateral civil reactivation. Then expand it. A pause. The Council will say we are escalating. They are already escalating. We are late. Do you have a viable structure? Yes. Saint Aurora. Do you have legal cover? Not enough. But I have a stronger angle. If Saint Aurora resumes active care under recovered resident registry in an independent Earth-supplied medical chain, it becomes evidence before it becomes argument. Solwyn was quiet longer this time. When he spoke, his voice had shifted. If you move, you may not get support fast enough from us. I know. You may also trigger review at the chamber level. I know. And if the hospital fails half open, they will call it proof that Earth politicized a dead facility in worsened conditions. I know. He let out a slow breath. Then do not half open it. When the call ended, Nara asked, was that approval? It was Earth's best imitation of plausible deniability, Iris said. By dusk, they had the shape of the plan. Saint Aurora would not be retaken like a fortress. It would be restored like a pulse. Jonas would reconnect the tertiary power line through the East Trench. Merrick would quietly gather loaders, drivers, and maintenance crews whose district credentials had been suspended but not fully deleted. Lisa would build a skeletal care staff from displaced nurses and technicians. Nara would keep Nightingale cargo held in orbit long enough to hide which modules Iris intended to move. Late that night, after the others had dispersed, Iris walked the dark street outside the canteen and watched little lamps flicker across the corridor under reduced power. Somewhere above the haze, Astor Gate still held her convoy. She thought about the dock workers scanning under temporary codes, about people signing because breathing mattered more than language until language took the right to breathe tomorrow, and about how neat the theft was when done through distribution and registry instead of open force. She keyed a note into her pad for herself alone. If they erase the civic fact, they can own the future. The next day, Saint Aurora stopped being an idea and became an operation. The first problem was power, which meant the first fight happened in places no one would ever call heroic. Jonas led Iris and two maintenance techs through utility trench below the east service lane into a concrete crawl space full of old conduits, coolant smell, and grit that stuck to their boots. They cut the visible feed to make the hospital look fully non-viable, he said. But they did not want a full district surge when they isolated the block. So they left the tertiary. Healthline tied to reserve. Weak enough to ignore. Useful enough to recover. How long to stabilize? Iris asked. If we had unrestricted access, 6 hours. With borrowed parts, old insulation, and patrol risk, maybe 16. Too long. Jonas glanced up. Then find me fewer laws. Before Iris could answer, footsteps passed overhead. Stabilization patrol. The team froze as dust shook loose from the concrete seams. After a minute, the sound faded. Jonas resumed work. That, he said, is what I mean by 16. While Jonas fought the grid, Iris fought the harbor. Vaylor had not rescinded descent authorization, but he had found softer ways to squeeze it. One landing lane for Nightingale auxiliary shuttles went under unscheduled inspection. A pallet of membrane filters was declared pending contamination review, and 2 volunteer crews lost local movement clearance because their employment tags had not been revalidated under temporary population code. Every obstruction had a careful name. None of them were random. Iris moved through the day in the rhythm she knew from border famines and corridor collapses. One minute she was on a comm line with Nightingale Cargo Command, swapping manifest numbers to keep sensitive crates hidden among ordinary medical freight. The next, she was in a loading yard with Merrick, helping redirect a water tanker before authority scanners could fold it into neutral distribution. Then she was in a cramped room with Lisa, comparing old floor maps to current triage needs. At mid-cycle, a local journalist asked her on record whether Earth intended to reassert symbolic influence over halcyon reach under the pretext of aid. Iris answered without heat. Earth intends to keep people alive without letting survival be used to delete who they are. It was a good line, maybe too good. It spread faster than she wanted. By evening, the counter-narrative had already begun. 3 inter-system outlets quoted anonymous stabilization briefings, saying Commander Halden had a history of privileging unilateral action over cooperative structure. One piece called her the corridor commander who always arrives with medicine and leaves political damage behind. Nara found the article on a public feed and snorted. They made you sound romantic. They're trying to make me sound reckless. Same machinery, different audience. The smear had purpose. It did not need to destroy her credibility completely. It only needed to make neutral observers think the stabilization authority might be the safer custodian. That same evening, Mara came in with worse news. They are reclassifying my dock crews in batches. Anyone who refuses the new tags goes to the back of the ration line. Anyone who accepts loses, standing under the old civic labor registry. That is coercion, Lisa said. It is polished coercion, Merrick replied. Same result. Iris looked at the layout on the wall. St. Aurora needed more than conviction now. It needed an independent supply movement, no matter what the harbor authority did next. She made 3 decisions in less than a minute. First, Nightingale would split its most critical medical cargo into smaller descent batches hidden within approved neighborhood relief modules. Second, Merrick's crews would operate through old district maintenance routes instead of formal freight channels whenever possible. If the authority wanted to stop them, it would have to do it visibly. Third, Jonas would get priority on every spare power cell, coupler, and thermal braid the convoy could release. Nara stared at her after the orders went out. You are stripping your own orbital safety margin. I am buying time. For the hospital. For the legal existence of the colony, Iris said. The next blow landed in public. A water convoy serving blocks 9 through 11 was delayed at a checkpoint because the authority said its access stamps were incomplete. By the time local volunteers rerouted emergency tanks, people had spent hours in line under dry taps. The district rumor network turned hot almost instantly. Some blamed the authority, some blamed Earth, and most blamed everyone at once. A mother shouted at one of Merrick's loaders outside the ration depot. You said Earth was bringing help. Where is it? The loader tried to answer, but she cut him off. My son does not breathe on legal time. Iris heard about it through 3 different channels before she saw the district feed. She went to the block herself. At block 10, she walked past angry lines, empty cistern tanks, and a volunteer medic trying to keep order with a cracked loudspeaker. The mother from the video was still there, hollow-eyed now, embarrassed after the moment of fury had passed. Iris asked her name. Dina Var. Your son, Thomas. He needs clean air packs. Where is he now? In the annex on Calder Street. Iris went with her. Tomas lay on a cot beneath a child-sized respiratory hood rigged to a backup scrubber that should have been replaced years earlier. He was old enough to understand enough and too sick to pretend bravery. Iris checked the pack serial numbers. Improvised. Wrong filtration grade. When she came back outside, Merrick was waiting, jaw tight. They timed the delay. Not enough to cause a mass casualty event. Enough to create panic and blame drift. Because panic makes signatures easier, Iris said. That night, she did something her Earth superiors would have called unhelpfully direct. She recorded a district message and pushed it through every local channel she could still reach. She did not promise salvation. She hated that kind of speech. She said who she was, what Earth was trying to move, and that current distribution protocols were being used to alter civilian status while relief was delayed. She said St. Aurora was being prepared for reactivation. And she said plainly that if people were being asked to exchange permanent civic identity for temporary supply access, They deserve to know it. The message spread faster than the smear pieces had. By morning, public pressure had shifted just enough to make Vaylor respond in person. He requested a formal meeting at the Central Administration Hall. Iris went with Nara and no one else. Vaylor greeted her with controlled irritation. You are inflaming a fragile civilian environment. I am naming the environment you created. You are politicizing emergency management. You mean I am describing it? His legal aide cut in. Commander Halden has no authority to issue public guidance on resident classification. Iris turned to the aide, then stopped making. People sign for water under altered status. Vaylor almost never raised his voice. St. Aurora will not be reopened. The facility is under review due to systemic risk. Your repeated references to its status create false expectations among the population. This time, Iris let him see a little of what she was thinking. Then you know you're close. Something flickered behind his composure. Not fear, recognition. When she returned to the East Quarter, Jonas met her at the old service gate with black residue on his sleeves and a savage grin. We have pulse, he said. He led her through a maintenance access route and into the hospital's lower utility chamber. Emergency strips glowed in 3 uneven bands along the wall. Not full power, but light. Lisa stood beneath one of the strips with a med scanner in hand and looked more alive than she had since Iris met her. It can hold the East Critical Corridor if the reserve cells keep cycling. How long? Iris asked. Long enough to start moving equipment if we can get inside the pharmacy lock. Can you? Lisa held up a broken seal tag. We already did. For the first time since landing, hope moved through Iris not as theory, but as structure. Thin, vulnerable, real. They spent the next 7 hours turning that hope into something harder. Merrick's crews moved shelf modules under maintenance tarps. Jonas stabilized 2 scrubber feeds and 1 water purification line. And Lisa reassembled a core treatment room using equipment salvaged from the annex, and the last unprocessed freight bundles Nightingale had managed to slip past formal inspection. It almost felt possible. Then the district lost a transformer bank. There was no explosion, no dramatic sabotage, just a cascade from an overstrained node 3 blocks north. The power drop rippled through the quarter, took out 2 support systems in an adjacent housing block, and left 1 stairwell full of trapped people until volunteers broke doors open by hand. 3 people died before emergency crews restored minimum light. None of them were in St. Aurora. That did not matter. The Authority Press Office issued a statement within the hour saying unauthorized strain on local. Reserve networks had complicated recovery response in the East Quarter. The wording was artful. It did not accuse Iris directly. It invited the conclusion. By the time she reached the housing block, residents were already arguing in the corridor. A man with soot on his face pointed at her and shouted, "You said you were helping." "I am helping," she said. "My sister is dead." Later, back in the operations room, Naraka shut the door harder than necessary. They set the condition and waited for a failure point. "Maybe," Iris said. "Do not do that. Do not give them uncertainty they have not earned." Lisa was white with fatigue. "We should pause. Stabilize the quarter first, then come back to the hospital." Jonas shook his head. "If we pause, they win. Not because the building matters more than the dead. Because tomorrow they will say the attempted reactivation already caused public harm." Merrick slammed a hand on the table. "And my crews will lose nerve." Iris looked at the inventory. The convoy still had emergency reserve fuel cells held in orbital storage for its own line security. Releasing them would narrow Nightingale's margin if Aster Gate tightened control or if return launch windows shifted. It would also give Jonas enough stable draw to hold St. Aurora's critical systems without leaning on the district grid during the most fragile stage. Earth Command would never approve it in time. Nara saw the decision before Iris spoke it. "You are about to rob our own safety. I am about to stop them from making the hospital dependent on a grid they can blame for anything. Those cells are our insurance." "No," Iris said. "They are our hesitation." Nara stared at her for a beat, then swore softly and keyed the transfer order herself. The cells descended under a sanitation equipment label before dawn. By sunrise, St. Aurora's East Wing was running on power the authority had not granted, with airflow steady enough to prepare the first respiratory bays. Iris stood in the admissions corridor with dust in the light and stripped walls around her. She thought not of triumph, but of timing. They had crossed from possibility into evidence. Now the real attack would begin. It began with the records. Everything else at St. Aurora looked increasingly like a hospital again by the time the first full cycle on Nightingale reserve cells was complete. The East Emergency Corridor held steady power. Clean water ran and measured output from the auxiliary filtration line Jonas rebuilt, and Lisa had gathered 12 nurses, 4 respiratory technicians, 1 surgical generalist, and a supply clerk who cried for 2 minutes when she saw the pharmacy shelves lit again and then went right back to work. Outside, Merrick's people kept a supply loop alive through district maintenance routes so narrow and improvised that any official freight planner would have called them absurd. That was why they worked. But all of it still sat on a knife edge because none of it yet restored Earth's civilian identity in legal terms. A lit building alone was not enough. A staffed building alone was not enough. The authority could still argue that St. Aurora was only an emergency shelter occupying a suspended facility inside an externally stabilized zone. And the files were missing. Lisa knew the main live registry node had been frozen when the authority locked the hospital. What she did not know until Jonas pulled old maintenance archives was that St. Aurora had maintained an offline continuity cache in a lower records vault for system loss scenarios. Most hospitals and frontier colonies did. Communications went down too, often not too. Jonas spread the old subfloor map across a trolley in the former diagnostics room. The continuity vault is here, beneath the south administrative stack. Separate power spine. Local authentication chain. It was designed to survive network partition. And the seal? Iris asked. Not on the official list. Which means they may have missed it when they froze the main system. Or found it and left a trap. Also possible. Lisa rubbed her eyes. If the vault is intact, we can rebuild admissions legitimacy. Not just treatment. Identity, coverage, district links, family claims. Hospitals did not only keep people alive. They made them legible to the civic body. Iris looked around the room. Then we go get the memory back. They moved at mid-shift when authority patrol rotation was thinnest around the East Quarter and public attention had shifted toward the afternoon ration lines. Iris took the lower route with Jonas, 1 technician, and a registry clerk named Sela Rowan, who once managed admissions verification at St. Aurora and now carried a portable authenticator like it was a relic. The lower service passage was thick with dust and coolant smell. Jonas cut through a maintenance grill and led them into a utility cross hall where emergency strips fluttered at the edge of current. At the south stack, they found a first sign the vault might still matter. The main admin door had been sealed by authority tape. The subfloor maintenance hatch beside it had not. Jonas crouched. They missed it, or thought no one down here knew what it was, Iris said. They opened the hatch by manual crank and descended into a cramped cavity beneath the floor plates. The continuity vault sat behind a composite panel with Earth civic health markings almost worn off by age. Sela touched the old emblem with her fingertips before she went to work. Authentication will fail if the integrity chain is corrupted. Can you still recover local data? Iris asked. Maybe, if the physical stack is whole. It took 12 minutes and 3 bypass attempts to wake the panel. The vault lights came on with a faint hum. Inside were 6 archived storage columns, environmental capsules, and a local confirmation server the size of a household cabinet. Dust covered everything. There were no breach marks and no official inventory strips. Sela exhaled in a way that sounded almost like pain. They really did miss it. The server booted slowly. Jonas watched voltage while Sela ran integrity checks with hands so steady Iris knew she had been shaking before and had chosen to stop. 3 of the 6 columns were dead. 2 were partially degraded. 1 returned enough clean structure to make everyone in the room go very still. Resident care continuity logs, historical district assignments, linked family records, insurance pathways, emergency claim references. Admissions sequence backlogs from the last 14 months before the freeze. Can you authenticate them? Iris asked. Sela swallowed. If I rebuild the local chain, and if at least one authorized clinician reopens intake under original facility code, then yes. It will not restore everything, but it will establish continuity. Continuity for what legal threshold? For proving St. Aurora was never rightfully extinguished as a civilian institution. They copied what they could on as shielded modules and sealed the original server again. Iris wanted the source preserved if this became evidentiary review beyond chamber level. When they climbed back into the upper corridor, Nara's voice hit Iris's calm heart. You need to get topside now. What happened? Council emergency notice. The Chamber of Civic Security is opening a review on unauthorized reestablishment of sovereign civilian infrastructure inside a stabilized zone. They're naming you personally. Iris kept walking. Who pushed it? Maris Dax's office. Valor is requesting immediate injunction against all Earth-operated activity in the East Quarter. They want you in transit to Vera Prime within one cycle. When Iris entered the temporary operations room above the canteen, the air felt harder. People already knew. Maris Dax was delivering a statement from a polished chamber on Vera Prime, framed by the seal of the Galaxy Council and the vocabulary of someone used to placing a knife in public while sounding reasonable. No authority, he said, should be permitted to inflame civic fragility by unilaterally restoring contested jurisdictional symbols in an unstable humanitarian environment. Lisa shut the feed off mid-sentence. He wants the hearing before we complete intake. He wants the hearing because he knows we are close, Iris said. Nara looked at the copied continuity modules on the table. Can we finish before you have to leave? We do not need everything, Iris said. We need enough. She broke the problem down quickly. What remains? Lisa answered first. One intake bay in full operation. 2 patient files opened under recovered St. Aurora registry. Medication chain logged as local Earth-supplied distribution. Jonas said. Stable lighting and scrubber flow through the intake corridor and respiratory room. Merrick said, a delivery line visible enough that no one can say was staged after the fact. Sela lifted the continuity module and a verified admissions bridge. Then that is what we do, Iris said. The last push felt both frantic and strangely quiet. Everyone knew the hearing changed the scale of the fight, but it did not change the immediate tasks. Outside St. Aurora, the quarter had started to gather without fully meaning to. Not in protest, but in attention. Authority patrols multiplied by evening. They did not storm the building. That would look ugly. Instead, they hovered, scanned, delayed, requested compliance, questioned licenses, and kept broadcasting statements about risk. Valor himself arrived at the perimeter just before shift change. He met Iris at the east entrance beneath the blank wall where the old flag had once flown. You are exceeding every restraint placed on your presence here, he said. And you are racing the law against the reality on the ground, Iris answered. There will be a hearing. I know. You would still have time to stand down. Iris looked past him at the residents gathering beyond the curtain. No, I would only have time to make your story easier. His gaze shifted to the lit admissions interior behind her. You think one building changes the status of a fractured colony. One building that treats named citizens under continuous local record while supplied through an independent Earth civilian chain inside the colony, you say has none of those things? Iris asked. Yes, I think that matters. For the first time, he showed something like real dislike. You are using the sick as legal architecture. No, Iris said. I am preventing you from using the sick as legal erasure. He left without another word. Inside, Lisa called from the intake station. We are ready. The first patient was not Tomas from Block 10, though Iris had half expected that. It was an older refinery worker named Jalen Soren with chemical lung injury, degraded oxygen tolerance, and a residency record partially recovered from the continuity cache. He arrived leaning between 2 relatives, exhausted, suspicious, and more interested in the air quality than in any symbolic meaning the moment might carry. That was exactly why the moment mattered. Sela stood at the intake terminal with one hand on the rebuilt admissions bridge. Lisa entered the patient markers. The terminal paused, searched the local chain, and then accepted the record under St. Aurora Civil Hospital, Port Helion District Care Authority, Earth Civic Health Continuity File. A simple confirmation tone sounded in the room. No one moved for a second. Then Lisa said, almost under her breath, "He is in." They treated him at once. Respiratory support, medication, name notes under an Earth-linked file. Real care, not theater. Merrick's people brought in the first visible medicine carts through the East Service Lane at the same time. The crates were not grand. They were ordinary. In another place, they would have been forgettable. Here, they looked like a line being redrawn. Jonas restored the old exterior sign 30 minutes later with auxiliary light and more stubbornness than proper parts. St. Aurora Civil Hospital glowed dimly through the dusk. Only one thing remained. The flag had been stored all this time in a sealed equipment trunk recovered from a district archive room. Someone had hidden it instead of surrendering it. Iris took the folded fabric in both hands and felt how heavy simple cloth could become when a system had spent days insisting it no longer belonged in the frame. Lisa stood beside her on the roof access platform. "You do not have to do this yourself. I know. You should leave for Vera Prime as soon as we have proof of operation." "I will." Lisa looked out over the corridor, where clusters of people were already stopped in the street watching the hospital lights. "This will not save us from everything." "It does not have to," Iris said. "It has to make lying harder." Together with one maintenance tech, she attached the flag to the restored pole bracket above the admissions facade. It rose in a weak wind beneath a sky still dirty from the conflict that had come before this phase of the crisis. Earth blew against dust, station light, and the low hum of emergency systems. Nara appeared at the roof access with the departure timer already on her pad. "You need to move. Vera Prime shuttle in 40 minutes. Iris took one last look at the lit intake corridor below. People were entering now with purpose instead of fear, and staff were moving in the pattern that only happens when work becomes real again. St. Aurora was not fully restored. It was fragile, underpowered, and one administrative strike away from fresh danger. But it was alive. She left before the image could turn into sentiment. As the shuttle climbed from Port Helion later that night, Iris looked down through the haze and saw the hospital as a small rectangle of stubborn light in a district still half dimmed by managed scarcity. The hearing would try to turn that light into an offense. Her job now was to make the council understand that it had become evidence first. Vera Prime looked untouched by every kind of scarcity Halcyon Reach was still enduring. Its civic quarter rose in terraces of pale stone and glass around the council complex, with processional bridges, water mirrors, and sealed gardens designed to imply that order had always lived there and always would. Iris had been to council chambers before, but never for something this naked. Usually the cruelty of systems came in committees, not in rooms arranged for history. The Chamber of Civic Security sat high in the Western Arc, a semicircular hall where every surface seemed designed to magnify seriousness while absorbing blame. Iris entered in plain Earth Relief uniform with no military insignia, no ornamental pinning, and no attempt at visual drama. She wanted the chamber to see exactly what she was, a civilian logistics commander who had come from a live hospital, not a performer made for council acoustics. That did not stop the chamber clerk from introducing the matter in the language Maris Dax's office preferred. Review concerning unauthorized re-establishment of sovereign civilian infrastructure within a designated externally stabilized population zone. Unauthorized. Sovereign. Infrastructure. Maris Dax presided from the upper bench with two associate arbiters and the expression of a man annoyed by the necessity of procedure when the correct outcome was obvious to him. Valerson sat at the authority table. Soreth Kane of Kelt Arden Consortium sat one row behind the civic advisory delegates, technically not a principal, but close enough to smell influence on him. Earth's formal representation had arrived late and thin, exactly as Iris expected. Solwyn was there by secure projection, not in person. That alone told her how much political cover Earth had chosen not to spend. She would not get rescued by rank in this room. Maris opened with the shape of the accusation. Commander Halden, did you or did you not direct the reactivation of St. Aurora Civil Hospital under Earth insignia while Halcyon Reach remained under lawful external stabilization? I directed the restoration of an Earth civilian hospital serving Earth residents whose legal continuity had been suppressed through stabilization procedure. Iris said. You did not answer the question. I corrected it. Muted reaction moved through the public tears. Maris ignored it. Did you act without chamber approval? Yes. Then we begin with fact. But fact was exactly what this room did not want in its raw order. It wanted framed fact, admissible fact, pacified fact. Vaylor's testimony came first. He described administrative collapse in Halcyon Reach following the conflict that brought the Stabilization Authority in. He described damaged utilities, absent local governance officers, breakdown of district routing, and the risk of competing jurisdictional instructions during humanitarian response. He spoke of Earth's valued support and Commander Halden's regrettable deviation. Every line was shaped to carry a partial truth and hide the hand guiding it. Then came the moral pressure line. An associate arbiter asked whether Iris had prioritized institutional symbolism over rapid aid delivery. A media delegate asked whether public messaging from Earth had worsened civilian fear. Another advisor asked whether restoring sovereign markers during unstable transition might increase social fragmentation. It was a neat trap. They wanted her on the ground of optics. Iris kept her gaze level and answered in the pattern she had. Chosen on the shuttle up, who was acting, what they were doing, and why. The Regional Stabilization Authority centralized all aid into a channel that required residents to accept temporary reclassification before regaining full access to essential support, she said. That process did not merely deliver aid. It altered civic status. Temporary classifications are common in emergency environments, said one arbiter. They are, Iris agreed, when temporary means temporary and when the administering power is not simultaneously dismantling the institutions that could end the classification. She turned slightly toward the chamber. Before I acted, St. Aurora had been sealed. Resident records had been suspended from local access. Labor crews were being pushed onto provisional tags tied to ration priority. District supply chains were being rerouted through neutral channels that erased Earth's civilian authority in practice while claiming to protect people in principle. Maris said, strong language is not evidence. No, Iris said, but structures are. She had spent the previous hour ordering the presentation sequence in her head. The first question was whether Halcyon Reach had truly lost recoverable civilian capacity, as the authority claimed. The second was who benefited from saying it had. She began with St. Aurora, because everything else attached there. Dr. Lisa Morrow testified remotely from Port Helion. She spoke not like an advocate, but like a clinician who had run out of patience with elegant falsehood. She described the stripping of St. Aurora's medication stores, the suspension of its registry access, and the conversion of neighborhood care into generic stabilization triage. Jonas Vale followed with technical evidence about the tertiary reserve line that proved the building had not become inoperable by natural consequence. It had been rendered non-functional in visible terms while hidden recoverability remained. Maris let the testimony run because he thought he could contain it. Buildings could be argued around. Iris let him wait. Then she called Sela Rowan. The chamber's tone shifted the moment Sela confirmed the existence of the offline continuity vault and the successful restoration of St. Aurora admissions under historical Earth-linked resident files. State precisely what was recovered, Iris said. Continuity records for resident care and district linkage, Sela answered. Not complete archives. Enough to establish that St. Aurora maintained recoverable civilian identity and that this identity had not lawfully lapsed prior to reactivation. Could the hospital admit patients under Earth civilian continuity once the vault was restored? Yes. Did it? Yes. The public tears stirred again. Was the first admission live care or symbolic registration? Iris asked. Live care. respiratory support and medication under active treatment record. There it was. Not a gesture. A functioning institution. One associate arbiter leaned forward. Commander Halden, are you arguing that a single restored hospital overrides chamber-classified stabilization? No, Iris said. I am arguing that the justification for classification was false in the form most useful to the authority. Halcyon Reach was presented as having lost meaningful civilian governance continuity. Saint Aurora proves recoverable continuity existed and could function once obstruction was removed. Maris stepped in before the line could harden. Recoverable after unauthorized intervention. Iris turned toward him. Suppressed before authorized review. The chamber fell still. That was the first real shift. They were no longer only debating whether she had acted outside permission. They were beginning to confront whether permission itself had been structured around a manufactured absence. Vela responded by moving to the next defense line. Even if Saint Aurora retained recoverable data, Commander Halden acted in a manner likely to exacerbate instability. She diverted aid flows, agitated public sentiment, and placed a contested symbol over a fragile humanitarian site. Now came the question of motive and profit. Iris had held that until the room was ready. She requested admission of the Kelt Arden reconstruction packages recovered from district planning mirrors and freight route pre-authorizations. Soreth Kane objected before she finished the sentence. That alone told half the story. Maris frowned. On what basis are corporate reconstruction drafts relevant to this review? Because they were written for a region being publicly described as a neutral stabilization priority and privately prepared for long-term resource and corridor transfer under conditions that required the continued absence of Earth's civilian authority, Iris said. The documents appeared on the chamber field. They were not secret contracts signed in blood. They were something more believable and more damning. Conditional redevelopment frameworks. Corridor extraction options tied to administrative continuity. Water table rights buried in infrastructure maintenance language. Transport concession timing linked to prolonged neutral governance status. Land use conversion if local sovereignty remained unresolved beyond specified review windows. Kane tried first. These are contingency drafts. Standard planning documents. For a medical emergency zone? Iris asked. For post-conflict recovery. Recovery into whose hands? He had no answer the room could tolerate. Iris kept going. Halcyon Reach was not only being stabilized. It was being prepared. If Earth's civilian continuity vanished long enough, resource corridors, municipal water control, and redevelopment rights could move under neutral recovery language into external management and contracted control. The population would survive. The community would not. Maris shifted tactics again. You are implying conspiracy from layered emergency planning. No, Iris said. I am describing incentive. The authority needed Halcyon Reach to look civically blank. Kelt Arden needed it to stay jurisdictionally ambiguous. And this chamber was being asked to bless the result after the fact. One of the associate arbiters asked the question Iris had hoped someone neutral would finally ask. Administrator Son, was the council informed that reconstruction and extraction transfer frameworks were being drafted before resident civilian status review had concluded? Vaylor answered too slowly. Relevant parties often engage in provisional planning. Before review concluded, the arbiter repeated, yes. At last, the room could see the outline of the machine. Human lives stabilized just enough to prevent scandal. Civic identity softened just enough to enable reclassification. Long-term economic advantage queued up just behind a humanitarian language. So Iris asked for the live feed. Maris objected. This chamber is not a theatrical venue. No, Iris said. It is deciding whether a living civilian institution may be legally treated as absent while it is operating in plain sight. The chamber permitted the feed by narrow procedural vote, probably because refusing it now would look too naked. Saint Aurora appeared above the presentation floor in real time. Not glamorous. The camera showed a lit admissions corridor, tired nurses moving between beds, a volunteer unloading sealed med trays, and 2 residents waiting with blankets around their shoulders. Above the entrance, visible through the open inner doors, the Earth flag moved faintly in the filtered breeze from the exterior vent flow. Lisa came on audio. St. Aurora Civil Hospital, Port Helion District, intake active. 12 admitted under recovered continuity this cycle. 27 on monitored waiting list. Pharmacy chain logged under independent Earth relief supply. Water reserve at 71% of current operating threshold. Respiratory wings stable. No one in the chamber spoke for several seconds. Maris tried anyway. A live feed does not settle jurisdiction. No, Iris said quietly, but it settles existence. She let the word stay there. Existence. Not claim. Not aspiration. Not political message. Valor made one final push. Commander Halden is asking this chamber to reward unilateral defiance. If every authority restored symbols whenever it disliked emergency classification, shared governance would collapse. Iris turned to him fully for the first time. What collapsed in Halcyon Reach was not shared governance. What collapsed was your ability to keep people alive and still call them ownerless. A sound moved through the public tier. Not applause, just the air changing when too many people recognized the sentence at once. She continued before anyone could interrupt. You say I politicized aid, but the politics were already there when food, water, medicine, and labor tags were tied to a new name for the people below. You say I restored a symbol. I restored a functioning hospital because your process required every Earth civilian structure to remain dead long enough for your terminology to sound natural. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You say the colony lacked continuous governance. It lacked permission to continue. Those are not the same thing. The chamber withdrew for deliberation. That part took too long and no time at all. Iris stood in an antechamber with Nara and watched no one. Solwyn reappeared by projection only long enough to say, "Whatever happens next, you move the ground." "I know," Iris said. "I still want the ruling." He almost smiled. "Of course you do." When they returned, Maris looked more controlled than before, which meant he was angry. The ruling was not glorious. It was more important than glorious. The chamber issued an immediate suspension of any final declaration that Halcyon Reach lay outside the representational scope of Earth, pending full civic continuity review. St. Aurora Civil Hospital was recognized under temporary protected Earth civilian operational status while investigation proceeded. Regional Stabilization Authority administrative actions related to resident reclassification and district distribution conditioning were placed under formal inquiry. All reconstruction and redevelopment agreements contingent on unresolved sovereignty status were frozen pending legal audit. Maris read the ruling as if every word cost him blood. Valor did not look at Iris when it ended. Soreth Kane did, once, with the expression of a man recalculating future profits under damaged assumptions. The media poured into the corridors afterward. Iris answered only enough to keep the story on its true axis. No, Earth had not one final jurisdiction. No, Halcyon Reach was not secure. Yes, civilians remained under severe pressure. Yes, the ruling mattered because it prevented the legal disappearance of a living human community. What does this mean for humanity in council-administered zones? 1. Reporter asked. It means people are not neutralized into non-existence because the paperwork arrives before the witnesses do, Iris said. 3 days later, she returned to Halcyon Reach, but not in command. They publicly affirmed the importance of her actions, privately reassigned her from active field command pending review, and sent a liaison team to manage the diplomatic aftermath with cleaner hands. It was not surprising. It still hurt. Nara met her on the shuttle ramp with a look that mixed disgust and affection. They gave you a desk. They are threatening me with a desk. Cruel. Iris stepped onto Port Helion soil again under a sky a little clearer than before. The district still wore strain everywhere. Water lines, patch power, and people who had not slept properly in weeks. But the East Quarter had changed in one unmistakable way. People no longer moved around St. Aurora like it was a tomb under legal quarantine. It was a hospital again. Not fully, not beautifully, But truly, she walked through the admissions hall and saw fresh intake charts, family members waiting with cups of recycled tea, Merrick arguing over delivery timing with a clerk who clearly trusted him enough to argue back, Jonas complaining to a maintenance crew that nobody respected proper load discipline, and Lisa sleeping upright in a chair for exactly 11 minutes before waking herself and going straight into the respiratory ward. The flag was still there above the entrance, faded already at one edge from dust and poor weather. Still there. Lisa found Iris by the records desk. They did not take it down. No, irisansith. They might still try later. I know. Lisa glanced toward the waiting room. But not the same way. That was true. Halcyon Reach remained contested. The council inquiry would move slowly. The authority would reframe itself, regroup, and look for narrower routes. Keld Arden would hire better lawyers. Maris Dax would probably survive the embarrassment and become more careful, which was in some ways worse than simple defeat. None of that changed the fact that a line had held. Later that evening, Iris stood outside St. Aurora as shift lamps came on in the quarter. The admissions doors opened and closed in a steady rhythm. The city was still damaged and unsafe, but it was speaking in its own civic voice again. Merrick came out carrying a crate manifest and nodded toward the flag. You know, half the district says they saw it go up. Did they? Other half says they only heard about it after. He shrugged. Does not matter. Everyone knows where it is now. Jonas joined them, grease on one sleeve. You cost me 3 nights of electrical sanity. You are welcome. Lisa appeared in the doorway behind them. She looked from one face to the next and gave a nearest thing to a smile Iris had seen from her yet. We admitted 32 this cycle, she said. No one asked what code they belonged under. That line stayed with Iris longer than the ruling, longer than the media, longer than the reassignment notice waiting on her pad. No one asked what code they belonged under. The night air carried refinery heat and distant salt from the reclamation basins. Overhead, traffic lights moved around Astor Gate in ordered threads, and somewhere beyond those ordered threads the council still believed it could manage the galaxy through procedure. Iris knew better than to call Halcyon Reach a victory. Too much remained uncertain, and too many people were still bruised by the days when survival had been made conditional on accepting someone else's name for them. Earth had not taken the belt back with force, but St. Aurora was alive, and a living institution is harder to erase than a ruined one. Above the entrance, the flag stirred once in the dust-heavy wind, and the hospital lights held. Halcyon Reach was still wounded, and the pressure was not over. The council would keep arguing, the authority would keep searching for narrower ways back in, and the people who profited from confusion would not simply walk away because one ruling had slowed them down. But something vital had changed. A line had held, a hospital had reopened, a record had survived, and a system that tried to turn living people into a nameless managed population had been forced, at least for now, to admit that the colony was still there. If this story stayed with you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves powerful science fiction stories where humanity refuses to be erased. Every like, every comment, and every subscription helps this channel grow and helps me bring you more stories of courage, endurance, and the stubborn human will to stand tall when the galaxy tries to force it to kneel. Thank you for listening. I truly appreciate your time, your support, and your presence here. And until the next story, may your day be peaceful, your heart be steady, and your imagination keep reaching far beyond the stars.